Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. So it's a little bit of a talk in two halves. So first of all, I'm going to talk you through some of the work we did that underpinned what we did in the second half. So we did a piece of work looking at some of the barriers and opportunities across our region. And then we did some work actually thinking about how can we actually address some of those barriers, only some of the barriers. So obviously I'm here talking to you today, but it is really on behalf of, I was going to say a cast of thousands, there clearly isn't thousands of us, but there were a lot of people involved in this. It started from an NIHR funded network. In the UK, the NIHR funded a number of palliative care research networks focused on different things, and our focus was our region. So I'm just going to tell you first about the region because I'm going to tell you about some of the results from the survey that we did across the region. So the region in NHS terms is called North West Coast, which doesn't really tell you a huge amount, but it is basically encapsulates Liverpool, Warrington, Preston, Lancaster, all the way up to Barrow. It does not include Manchester and Greater Manchester, but it does now. It didn't at the time that we did the survey, but of course they've reorganised. I'm just hearing about some of your reorganisation. We do love reorganising, don't we? So it now is called the North West region and includes Greater Manchester. And the people in the research delivery network who now manage that tell me it has a population the size of Bulgaria. So there you go. We are actually talking about quite a sizable region, which includes two pretty major cities of Liverpool and Manchester. So we got this money and we wanted to understand locally what some of the issues were. And one of the reasons they gave us some money to build a research network was because the Northwest Coast, as it was then, is the area with the second highest palliative care need in the UK. Some very deprived areas, Blackpool, for example, is the most deprived area in the UK, or has the most deprived area within Blackpool within the UK. But actually, the second lowest engagement with palliative care research. So lots of need, very little research. So we just wanted to understand a little bit more about what was going on. So first of all, we did a survey. And you know, when you say it like that, it sounds really straightforward. We did a survey. I was just chatting at the table earlier. That required an NHS Research Ethics Committee application and individual governance approval from 35 different institutions. So it's not, yeah, thank you for the groan. But we did do the survey, we did send it out, and we got 293 people to complete it, which was fabulous. We also ran some quite qualitative working groups, as we called them, to try and unpick and understand some of these things in a little bit more detail. And you can see there, we actually had a really wide spread of people who responded. So about 27% of those who responded came from our local hospices, and there are quite a number of hospices across that patch, both paediatric and adult hospices. 24% of them came from the hospitals, not always specialist palliative care, there were generalists as well. 20% primary care, and obviously other people as well. I've just picked out some of the highlights there. We also had a really nice spread of types of responders. So about 45% of the people who responded were nurses, about 15% doctors, about 16% researchers, and of course all sorts of other people as well. And in fact, fairly soon, fingers crossed, you will be able to read all about this in BMC Palliative Care, because we've just sent in our revisions from the paper, which has been sitting with them for a little while. So hopefully they're going to accept that and you'll be able to read all the detail of exactly who these people were. I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail. I'm going to go straight on to the findings now. And we encapsulated the findings in 4 particular areas. So the sorts of things that people identified and spoke about were related to organisational culture and capacity, to research knowledge, to research infrastructure, and to the patient and public perceptions of participating in palliative care research. Now, what we did was we ordered that, we ranked it. Because obviously in the survey, people were ranking things, so we were able to see what was most important to them. And in the working groups, they were iteratively, qualitatively coming forward with both barriers and solutions, which we then, as part of our focus group design, asked them to rank. So on the next slide, what you'll see is the top 5 rankings. The first column is from the survey, and the subsequent columns are for our working groups. And what I want you to pay attention to here is the colours. So if we go back one, you'll see I colour-coded things. Orange is organisational culture and capacity, and green is research knowledge, purple infrastructure, blue patient and public perceptions. And what you can see there is there is no blue. So the top 5 things were nothing to do with patient and public perceptions of research. It did come in later. I'll show you the next 5 in a moment. But what you can see there is a lot of orange and green. So the sorts of issues that people were talking about were related to infrastructure and knowledge. They were the things that they were really, really highlighting. And then when you go to the next things, this is the next 5, so down to 10, you can see some blue starting to come in there, but still an awful lot of orange. That organisational culture and capacity was probably the most important thing that people talked about in terms of the barriers. Now, I actually think that's really important because we can do something about that. When we talk about patient and public perception of research, of course we can do something to affect that as well. But our own organisations, our own organisational culture, sure as heck we can do something about that. And some of the qualitative things that people said really illustrated that as well. And you've heard that, I've heard that this morning from people talking about the clinical demands and how what they're measured against is their key clinical performance indicators. Many of these organisations didn't necessarily have any research performance indicators, and so sadly we are quite driven by those things at the moment. If we're not being asked to do them, then we're probably not going to do them either. So here we are, 90%, if not more, of your time undertaking clinical aspects of the role, and there isn't necessarily buy-in to research. People also talked about some of those sort of knowledge and understanding type things. I don't know where to go to. I don't know how to find the literature. I'm in a minefield of information and I don't know which avenue to take. Because actually, understanding what's already out there in research terms is not straightforward. It's not easy to find what you're looking for. And there was also a lot of understanding that actually people were a long way away from actually being able to run their own study. We're a million miles away from that in our hospice. We're trying to be involved in some of the bigger trials, and you heard about some of that this morning. That's fantastic. But they just wouldn't know where to start with, say, putting in a research ethics application. We're nowhere near that here. So as a result of that in our network, we've actually been doing quite a lot of locally based work. So we've run some action learning sets with people. We've been running regular research network days. We've been presenting at local and national conferences. We currently are running some research development groups, bringing people together from across the region to actually work with academics, with clinicians, with people from different backgrounds, to actually start to develop research applications for funding. And so actually it's been a very powerful way of bringing people together and trying to enhance their opportunities to being involved in collaborative research. And that's actually really important, because I don't think research is an individual endeavour. When you're doing a research qualification, your master's degree, your PhD, it is to some extent an individual endeavour, because obviously it's an individual qualification that's going to be awarded to you. But most research isn't, and probably shouldn't be, individual. We need to work together. And that's why it's so exciting seeing so many people in the room today. And I've already said this chatting over lunch. Let's not run 40 or 50 individual research projects. Let's run 2 or 3 really brilliant projects together, because we are much stronger together. We also recognised as part of that some of the things that they were talking about, again, were within our gift to do something about. So if you like, my presentation in 2 halves is to talk about some of what we actually did to try and address that. So we got together, Christina was part of that as well, with people who were interested in developing research in the hospice setting. Marie Curie, Cassia here is one of our stars, Sue Ryder, some of the academics, Hospice UK, to actually say, what could we do to try and make some of this better? Only in a sort of small part of that. So what we decided to do was to pull together some hospice research resources for hospices that wanted to get engaged in research. And that was at different levels. So some of my colleagues at Lancaster, you've seen the report mentioned a couple of times by both Christina and Cassia, did the sort of research-ready hospice work about the different levels. So much of this is focused on people who are just starting out in research and don't really quite know where to turn to. So rather than producing some very bulky document or textbook, what we decided to do, having put our ear to the ground and heard what people wanted, was to produce some short, bite-sized resources. So they are all currently hosted on the website, and it is a living, breathing resource. So living and breathing that I uploaded some of the resources last night. So it would be as up to date as possible when I was coming to talk to you today. And we've divided those into 4 sections, taking you through some of the lifetime of a study. So you can see those there. Planning the study, setting up the study, running the study, and disseminating the results of the study. And so what we did was we twisted a lot of arms and got a lot of people to produce short videos. So each one of these resources is a really short video. So as an example, here's yours truly on the planning a study page. And if you go to that page, you'll see there's a whole raft of these that obviously this is just a snip from up at the top. And so that's me for about 5 or 6 minutes. That's all. They're really quite short resources talking about research questions. And each one of those is accompanied by an A4 document that's no more than 2 sides of A4. Some of them are just 1 side of A4, encapsulating the key information so that they really are bite-sized. People can just dip into them for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and really start to understand something about, for example, in this instance, research questions. For setting up a study, we've got AIIHPC is our integrated research ethics application system. So this is UK specific. You're obviously going to have a system like that fairly soon. So there's some really practical things like that, finding your way around AIIHPC or the Clinical Research Network. So some of these resources are, UK specific. But many of them, particularly the ones on planning a study, are not UK specific at all. They would be as relevant to you here in the island of Ireland as they would be anywhere else, because how you write a research question doesn't really matter where you are, does it? So there's a whole, under each one of these, we started off with perhaps 2 or 3 resources. The one now, the first one on planning a study, I think probably has about 10 different videos to watch. I don't know, I just keep uploading them as they arrive. Then there's obviously ones on running a study. So here's one of our colleagues from Sue Ryder talking about some aspects to do with informed consent. And then there's a page on dissemination, which is one of our colleagues at Hull York Medical School, Jonathan Kaufman, talking about writing for publication. So what we've tried to do is pull in people from all over the UK. And when you have a look at the website, if there's something there that you would like us to cover, that falls into one of these 4 topics, then please come and offer your services, because I'd be really happy to talk you through how we've been doing it. I was talking to Christina over lunch, our sort of, necessity is the mother of invention. And this is a great example of that. These resources were meant to be hosted somewhere else, and I won't bore you with the details of why they're not, but we were told with only a week to go that they couldn't be hosted anymore. And so they're hosted on a website that I manage. So when we're talking about web design, that's me. So don't complain if it's not as user-friendly as it could be, because I am working at the limits of that particular part of my knowledge and understanding. But, in palliative care, we are make, do and mend. I was like, well, I have this website that we run for the network that the NIHR have set up, and I have, I have the permissions to add things to it, so we're just going to do it on that page. And everyone went, yeah, right, we'll do it on that page, and right, there it was. Because actually what we're hearing now from people is how useful those bite-sized resources are. So it's been really, really successful so far, but there are many more resources to add. So if you think there's something that's missing, do say. I might say, oh yeah, I'm expecting that next week or next month, or when it's been recorded by somebody, but we might not have thought of it. So please just do say. But the other thing I was going to say is that this is really quite, it's not always basic. Basic is the wrong thing, because some of it is really complicated. Writing a great research question sounds basic, but it's not basic. I can see people nodding and saying, it's really, really complicated. But they are tasters to start off. And I've said to 1 or 2 people today, I thought I knew something about research when I did my bachelor's, my undergraduate degree. And then I did my master's degree, and I thought I knew something about research, because it was a research master's when I did my master's degree. And then I did my PhD, and then I realised I know nothing about research. And in the 10 years or so, or however many years since I've got my PhD, every day is a learning day. And I said to somebody yesterday, the PhD is the basic level qualification in research. And of course it is the highest degree that you can get. But actually I'm going to encourage you all to do a PhD. So this is not just an advert for Lancaster, but because obviously there are great PhD programs here in Ireland as well. But actually for those of you that are really thinking of engaging in a research career, you need to think about the education that you need to enable you to do that. So this is only slightly tongue-in-cheek. Obviously it's a brilliant program. As they say, other programs do exist. But I want to challenge you to think about the research education that you have. That's my real challenge to you. I'm a nurse by background, and I do say by background now. If you look me up, I'm still a registered nurse, but I haven't looked after patients for years. And so when I did look after patients, I was, say, involved in abdominal paracentesis, okay? Wasn't doing it. I was assisting the doctors in doing it. I saw one. What is it they say? See one, do one, teach one? Okay. It's not like that in research. You wouldn't let me near a patient now with ascites, and you'd be quite right not to do that. But my challenge to you is, as a group, do we have the education that we need to run really robust research studies? Because sometimes we've been associated with research, but we don't necessarily understand research. So it is a little bit of a challenge, and I'm finishing a lot of talks with this challenge at the moment, because we see a lot of small-scale studies that sometimes are not very well executed. And my challenge is to educate ourselves to do fantastic, large-scale studies together. Thank you.